Good evening, everyone. I am Lisha Dore, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to One-on-One, where we bring to you some of the best minds in Trinidad and Tobago. In just a few weeks, Trinidad and Tobago has been a part of high-level discussions with the United States, global energy companies, and the heads of government of Latin America and the Caribbean. Is this a coincidence? Or is it a sign that our country's geopolitical importance is rising? And that is what we are here to discuss tonight. We are going to take a closer look at something that shapes the future of our country very quietly, and that is Trinidad and Tobago's geopolitical positioning. Now, in recent weeks, we've seen some very interesting developments taking place, and these developments highlight just how strategically important Trinidad and Tobago is becoming on a regional and international stage. Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, she would have recently joined leaders from across the hemisphere at the Shield of the Americas Summit in Florida. I'm sure many of you would have seen all of the news reports on that. And that was a very important summit that focused on things like security cooperation, intelligence sharing, and the fight against transnational crime. It should be noted that Prime Minister Persad-Bissessar was one of only two CARICOM leaders invited to that summit and the only female leader. So we want to congratulate the Prime Minister on that. That meeting alone tends to signal that Trinidad and Tobago is growing as a key security partner in the Western Hemisphere. And at the same time, we saw diplomacy translating into economic interest. Within 24 hours of the Prime Minister's meeting with the U.S. Energy Secretary, global giant, energy giant Chevron signals its interest in having discussions with Trinidad and Tobago. And that would have been on the headline, I think, of The Guardian yesterday. So that's great news for Trinidad and Tobago. Now, weeks earlier, the Prime Minister would have participated in the 50th CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in St. Kitts. And interestingly, that was another historic first for our country because it is the first time Tobago Chief Secretary, a Tobago Chief Secretary, in this case, the Honorable Farley Augustine, would have attended that meeting on the invitation of a Prime Minister. So I think this is all great news for Trinidad and Tobago when you put all of these developments together, security partnerships, energy diplomacy, regional leadership. We are seeing a very, very clear picture beginning to emerge, and that is Trinidad and Tobago is not just another small Caribbean island. We are a country where location, resources, and diplomacy place us at the intersection of major regional and global conversations, right? That is the way I am seeing it. And tonight we're going to explore what all of this means. Our presenter is the very renowned, knowledgeable political analyst, Dr. Shane Mohammed, who could say what I just said in a much better way, I'm sure. Right. So Dr. Mohammed, he is highly sought after for his insights, his analysis. I'm truly humbled and honored. I'm sure my co-moderator would agree that Dr. Mohammed has taken some time to spend with us this evening. The last time I believe Dr. Mohammed, you would have joined us would have been 2 months ago, just after the THA election, and we discussed Farley's clean sweep 15-0, and that was indeed a very engaging and informative discussion as well. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us tonight. I'm seeing some of the regular people online already. We are live on social media as well as Zoom, Facebook, YouTube. We are live. Guys, please share the live. This is going to be a very, very engaging and interesting conversation. So welcome to all of you. We're thrilled to have you here with us tonight. As I say every week, we aim to make this discussion as interactive as possible. So please raise your hand if you want to ask a question, make a contribution. I know our panelist tonight is very capable and can answer all your questions, right? Without further ado, I want to now pass the mic over to Donnie, and he will say a few words and then kick off our conversation tonight.
Good night, Lisha. Thank you. Good night to our guest, Dr. Mohammed. He is always willing to accept the invitation when he's called. So, Dr. Mohammed, thank you for that. I know your time is very valuable. Lisha, you just touched on something there. I don't think there has ever been a guest on this program who could not answer something posed to him directly by the audience. This speaks to the volume and the caliber of people that we put onto the program, and not to Ramon Horner because I was beyond the program sometime as a guest, right? But over the last 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks or so, we haven't really seen the dust settled as yet, because immediately on return from the St. Kitts trip with the CARICOM heads of government, we heard about the invitation that was extended to our prime minister, and within a couple of days, they would have left and gone on to it. And then there would have been some major announcements during, and I mean, she has not returned as yet. So I think Trinidad is still in the cusp of all the activity surrounding these two significant events. It shows that we are important in the region, and the reaching out by the US government, in my opinion, I think is a platform for us to base our future development on. If we say we want to go into tourism, look at St. Lucia. St. Lucia was a banana-based economy. After a hurricane, they had to go into tourism. Tourism now consists of the mainstay of the economy. And why? Because they are safe. Tourists not going to go places in which they are safe. Now, when we look at Trinidad and Guyana, we are the two countries that are most impacted from the issues stemming out of South America. We have seen President Trump take a certain position on that over the last few months, and it is continuing. So in my opinion, these things are welcome. Sometimes, as I always say, when you want to make cake, you have to break eggs, So sometimes we need to do what we have to do. In my opinion, we need to align ourselves in a certain way in order to achieve development. So I wouldn't say anything more. I would leave it up to our very competent guest, Dr. Mohammed. You could take over from here. The floor is yours, Chief.
I just want to say thank you so much and good evening for having me again. When I think about governance and governance of a nation, because my PhD brain my PhD is not in political science. My PhD, when I was designing and when I was looking at what I wanted to study at a PhD level, political science would have made it a little bit too narrow. And I wanted to have a lens that would widen that. So it was focused more on leadership and governance, which has an element of political science in it, right? And one of the things that I always, and Donnie, you said something about the dust has not settled. And I don't expect that the dust will settle for Trinidad and Tobago, and it ought not to. And anytime we see the dust settling, you know that we as a people are settling and we're going back to a certain behavior. And I say that in the context of, and Lisha, you made a very good point, that it means that we are considered important. Let me add an addendum to that. What we are doing under this Prime Minister is returning ourselves to the front line of leadership in the region, something that Trinidad and Tobago has owned since before its independence. And depending on the Prime Minister and the government that was in power over the years, we saw ourselves reverting backwards. But I don't remember, and I don't recall in my political science history a period of time when Trinidad and Tobago's leadership regressed more than when it was under the former Prime Minister Rowley. And I say that in the context of a very small thing that has irked me in the last couple of hours. And I saw it and I shared it with a colleague of mine today. And I said, you know what is annoying? He said, boy, why are you sounding so? And I'm very angry this afternoon, today. He said, why get you so vexed? I said, when we govern a nation, we don't govern a nation for 5 years. We govern a nation in the first instance in 5 years. That's a short-term goal. Then we looked at 7 years, and we looked at 10 years, and we looked at 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. I don't think that when Mr. Pandey and those back in the day, when Mr. Pandey especially, when he governed Trinidad and Tobago, he didn't govern Trinidad and Tobago for the period of 95 to 2000, but beyond that period. And when Mrs. Prasad Bisasa governed and Mr. Manning governed, they governed with the years ahead thinking down the road. But one of the things that irks me is that when we want to shut down, and why it's relevant is that when we want to and you talk about energy security and looking at energy resources, when we want to shut down industries and don't have a plan as to what to do after we shut down, then there should be something that says to us in our head we shouldn't shut it down. Because if you don't know what you're going to do next, then don't do what your first thought was. And had we not been so short-sighted in leadership and visionless in leadership, and even if, and I will put this part of it, even if there was evidence or reports to show that Petrotrin was being bled out, that there was redundancy at an MBA level, because everybody goes after an MBA, and in business and entrepreneurship, there's something called restructuring. There's called realignment. There's ensuring that HR takes over and looks at this thing, a business model from a perspective as to where we could position the entity in order to realign it back to becoming profitable. Because you know what is happening to Trinidad and Tobago now? While the Prime Minister is outside busy looking for persons to come back to Trinidad and to start digging and drilling and exploring and looking for where the minerals are, we could have been doing that while at the same time gaining revenue from our functioning refinery. Because guess what? Our oil prices as of last night is on the cusp of $100 a barrel. For the first time, as far as I can remember, in a very long time, maybe in a decade. So that is the short-sightedness that irks me. The people who are opposing the government's positions and positioning for Trinidad and Tobago need to understand what they did when they were in office, what they failed to do in their duty to Trinidad and Tobago as a whole, every single Trinbagonian that holds a passport that has Trinidad and Tobago on it, and the repercussions that we have had to suffer, keyword suffer, as a result of their lack of vision and lack of leadership. They're complaining about the dust not. I'm very happy that the dust is not going to settle, because there's a Prime Minister that said she was going to, she said Trinidad and Tobago is open for business. She said that Trinidad and Tobago is going to go out there and reposition itself to make put Trinidad and Tobago first, that we are going to seek out every single opportunity that there is to ensure that we revitalize the economy, we provide maximum opportunity for people. And there are 3 words that she says, that she's going to, as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, she's going to ensure the peace, security, and prosperity for all of our people. Not for UNC people, not for COP people, not for people that voted for the party and the government, but for all of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, given the volatility, I will also say, what makes her stand out is that she has clearly mastered the art of understanding individuals that may come across as difficult, understanding the powers that are existing in front of her, and realigning herself in order to ensure that she's in direct line of sight, and that she can be heard, she can be seen, and that she can have a seat at the table. And anything that involves Trinidad and Tobago having a seat and being invited to not only have a seat, but to also have a voice at the table, that is going to lead to long-term development for Trinidad and Tobago, my political science tells me that that's a right thing and a step in the right direction.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks, Shane, right? And we touched on a couple of things there, right? You spoke about energy security. Now, one of the things I want to get into, well, I want to talk about a couple of things, right? Maybe let's first start with the Shield of Americas Summit, which took place in Florida over the weekend. And we did see the Prime Minister, the Honorable Kamala Prasad there, along with her delegation, invited with only one other CARICOM leader and several leaders from Latin America. Now, what does that tell you specifically? Trinidad's participation in that forum, what does that tell you about our role in the Caribbean region as well as the Western Hemisphere?
Well, for those people who read and pay attention, one, Trinidad and Tobago is responsible for security in the region. That's the portfolio that Trinidad has as it pertains to CARICOM, right? We are responsible for security. Two, our radar systems are very, very simple radar systems that currently exist outside of the one that is in Tobago, especially the systems that also govern the airspaces. Does not only govern our own airspace, it governs a wide cross-section of the airspace of the Southern Caribbean. So much so that there's consistent communication between airlines when they're leaving one airspace and entering another airspace, and when that discussion takes place between air traffic controllers as it pertains to handing over the responsibility of the aircraft as it transitions to its next destination. On top of that, when everything else around Trinidad and Tobago seems to be chaotic, Trinidad and Tobago's airspace becomes valuable because that's where the line of direction is guided, and the directive as to where you fly is within Trinidad and Tobago airspace. That tells us that Trinidad and Tobago airspace is outside of the line of where they could be in problems, but also that Trinidad and Tobago is a space that they could land in order to get fuel. They could get if there's mechanical problems, that sort of thing. That's one. But on top of that, because Trinidad and Tobago can identify with certain criminal elements and the issues that arise and the problems that are faced, and because Trinidad and Tobago has suffered a fate where governments from the time gone by has been trying to deal with how do we stop transnational organized crime, there's an understanding that Trinidad and Tobago has been fighting a battle that the United States has also been battling. And Donald Trump, as the president, as before he became president, he campaigned on the fact that he was going to stop the movement of drugs into the United States because it was damaging and causing so many different issues that was arising as a result of drug abuse, including death, that he was determined to break that mold. On the flip side, we have a prime minister here who's saying the very same thing, that the economy cannot be one where we have to be consistently aware of and considering a black market. And if the black market is existing, how then does she and what can she do to ensure that the black market cease to exist? So the positioning of Trinidad and Tobago, the inclusion of Trinidad and Tobago, the fact as well that the Prime Minister was one of the first Prime Ministers in the region to say yes to President Trump is also very significant. First in line is also very important, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing about it is, it means that there's a recognition that there's skill set, there's geographic location, there is cooperation, there's intelligence, there's advanced technology, there's so many advancement as it pertains to resources that Trinidad and Tobago ought to be at the front line of this thing, especially as it pertains to CARICOM. On top of that, with regard to Guyana, the issue as it pertains to Venezuela and the issues that has happened there and the encroachment on the Guyanese sovereign territory pose a direct threat to the sovereignty of Guyana. The fact that we as a nation, since the rise of the Maduro administration, has been suffering, and I keyword suffering, from the consistent movement of illegal migrants into Trinidad and Tobago without effective and proper framework structures and mechanisms to monitor, register, and to ensure safety and security says a lot, because we have become, in some instances, there were periods between 2016 even until 2024. I wondered to myself, these people have been in this country for so long, but they have not gotten themselves ingrained into our society, but they've become another subset of society. And as such, we have created a sense of alienation. We have not alienated them. In fact, we, in some instances, felt alienated in our own country by a subset of persons who stuck together and didn't get themselves into our society and in our culture and whatnot. I mean, very few percentages have done that. So the point is this: the issues that are pertinent to what the Shield of America represents, Trinidad and Tobago has been a quote-unquote victim of all of the issues that this shield now is about to address. And I think that is very important for us to understand in that context.
All right, I'm seeing a very interesting comment on the chat here. And this person says, it says Trump thinks Trinidad and Tobago is a vassal state of the US. How would you respond to that?
Now, Trump, when you want to put labels onto what Trump thinks, I will say it in simple terms. It is what Trinidad could provide to Trump, and also what Trump could provide to Trinidad and Tobago. And if it is that that Mr. George thinks that Trump believes that we're a vassal state of the US, then that may very well mean that at some point in time, he has thought about Trinidad and Tobago and the value that Trinidad and Tobago brings to him. It is now up for Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that we're not just passing in the wind, and we are not just something that he utilizes and casts away, that we maintain beyond this period, long term. We have to not just think in the now. We're thinking in the now, it's very important to think in the now, and we need to act accordingly in order to gain maximum benefits. But then we have to think long term. So I can't agree with that, the fact that Trinidad is a vassal state of the US. But I think that we need to make sure that we position ourselves to always be part of the conversation and within the room, but also within sight, so that we can have a say and we can also get the results the Prime Minister seeks to get for us. That's my position on that.
Okay, Donnie, shall I go ahead, or are you coming in?
Well, I think Dr. Mohammed is very correct, and he raised something there. It's about positioning. And if you're not in the room, you're out of the room. Can Trinidad, as a small island developing state, a state that is so close to the South American border, afford to not be in the room? When we look at our murder toll, comparatively to the previous period, there are significant decreases. So we're already seeing that the little action, and when I say little action, I'm saying that in the context that now there's a formal agreement, we may see more happening, has provided and has resulted in very significant decreases in the murder rate, So I think it is all about positioning. And as I said, if you're not in the room, you're out of the room. And can we afford to be out of the room? Statistics and history says that we have not gained that arrest on the murder rate, right? Except when this action from President Trump started. In my book, sometimes you have to deal with things in a certain way to create the kind of results that you need. So I would just like to say that, I would prefer to be in the room than outside of the room.
The thing about it is, way back in 2018, and I think I shared this on this program, if I'm not mistaken. I went to Venezuela because I needed to get some information to write a paper to present at a conference that was taking place in Peru. And it had a lot to do with the positioning of Trinidad and Tobago, and as it put in relation to Venezuela, the social conditions that existed both in Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, and how was the oil revenue that was gained by both Trinidad and Tobago trickling down to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in one instance, and the people of Venezuela. And During the course of that time that I was there, one, Venezuela had become a military state. So when you, unlike Trinidad and Tobago, when you enter, you fly into Caracas, it's a beautiful view. Venezuela has been built over the years to be a very beautiful country. But when you walk off that plane and you enter into the building that is supposed to be the airport terminal, you are met by soldiers with guns. And you are met at immigration by people in military uniform that are searching your luggage and your belongings. And then you are asked a very specific question, and they all look at you to see whether you flinch. How much money do you have? And if you don't answer quick enough, confidently enough, then they will search you. And if they find you lying, they're going to take the money that is on you. The point I'm making is this. I also saw how people lived in poverty, abject poverty, where people on one hill alone with 10 houses, all 10 houses were connected to one sewer line that was running into our drain. I also saw where the value of the money had been so diminished that when you change and you have to be careful how much money you change. If you change 100 US dollars, you may end up with a knapsack full of Bolivarian dollars. I also saw where, upon leaving the hotel to come back to Trinidad, I gave, because you can't change the money, I gave the staff the rest of money that I had. And I saw people break down in tears in gratitude because they were living by a month-to-month means, especially by something called a food box. And if your food box ran out, you're going to starve, right? I saw where people whose parents had worked over the years to have mansions and properties, and they'd gone to university and become lawyers and had all of these things under President Chavez, they had left it all, sold what could be sold, and they took their riches and they moved on. In fact, the driver that was taking me around, he was the last remaining member of his family. And a lawyer, his sole responsibility was to dispose of the last bit of his father's assets before they all moved to Miami. So there's this host of movement of people out of Venezuela, and they went to anywhere they could have found that would have taken them. That is why Panama started putting visa restrictions. Countries started to put up restrictions because it became overwhelming. So when you have somebody saying that it was because of sanctions, it was not because of sanctions. The sanctions were as a result of the bad, poor leadership that was governing a country that had all the money at the top of the pyramid, and it was not trickling down, and nobody knew where the money was going. It had to do with the fact that there was illegal tankers that were getting supplies of oil and gas from the Venezuelan ports and using the back channels and back black markets to traverse the sea in order to get to other markets. That's the reality that the report, that the study shows, right? That is a breakdown of lawlessness that you have to be mindful of where you're going, the time of the night, and that is not the Venezuela that many people that have left the Venezuela are accustomed to. So there are so many conditions that have existed and festered over the last decade that it becomes now important that when Trinidad and Tobago can't live in a vacuum, nor do we live, yes, we live in an island, but not an island in the middle of no man's land, in nowhere. We have to also be aware that our positioning and what we do for our economics and what we do for our prosperity and our long-term governance also has to take into consideration our current sociological strata, what it consists of, what it looks like, what are the issues that are arising, what we have been faced with over the last couple of years, how much money is in the treasury, how much money was not spent effectively, how much money was squandered, and how do we now start to pick up the pieces? I will also say all of this is what you call the results of people being in government for 10 years and not respecting the voices of the people and the goodwill of people who granted them the opportunity to be employed by the people. And now you have a new government having to come and clean it up. But this is not the first time in our history that this is happening. This seems to be a recycled event. So listen, fool me once, fool you is one thing. Fool me twice is another thing. But can we afford to get fooled to the time? Because this was what happened when the NER took office to clean up the mess in 1986, when the UNC took office to clean up the mess in 1995, and when the EP Partnership took office to clean up another mess in 2010. And here we have another golden opportunity where another political party again has come into office. And I'm looking on and taking an observer role, and I'm seeing similar trends where people want to spread a set of misinformation and miscommunication and bacchanal and comments, and the lacqueray is frustrating, right? And you have to sift through all of that information to find out what the truth is. So I will say to you that I know what it is to be a victim of discrimination in my own country. I've faced it. But I also know that in that, what we aspire for, to get rid of that discrimination because you share a different opinion, or you prefer that something is done differently, or something is done new, or you don't agree with the way it's done, or you can tweak the way it's done. That level of getting cast aside, I know what that feels like. And here you have an opportunity where voices can be heard, ideas can be put forward, government is open for business. People want, ministers and CEOs and chairmen of boards want to hear what can be done to add value to Trinidad and Tobago. That's all part of the conversation we're in. So, when people take that we're not living, this is not just all about Donald Trump and the drugs and the energy. This is a bigger picture of, at the end of all of this, if the dust does settle, the bottom line is when the oil prices went up, Trinidad and Tobago should have been profited. When the world conditions start to spiral out of control and markets started to flourish because of conditionalities, Trinidad and Tobago should also be part of the beneficiaries of that. When world leaders are gathering, they must want to hear from Trinidad and Tobago. When economics is going good and when markets are open and things are looking attractive, Trinidad and Tobago should be at the front of that level, that attractiveness to foreign direct investors. And if all of that is the reset that the government and the Prime Minister is seeking to do, then I see no problem with it either.
Doc, you said something there that is very important. And you were talking about the position that Trinidad holds when it comes to, other nations. And he gave reference to, your MBA studies. Anybody in the MBA, in an MBA program, one of the first things that you're taught is our comparative advantage owing to where we are, right? Because of our location, because of our experience, our long-standing history and experience in oil and gas, it makes us extremely strong from a comparative point of view. Our access to labor, our land, and I mean, if anybody doubt that, I think you need to go back to school, But at the end of the day, Trinidad and Tobago is very significant from a comparative advantage. And a comparative advantage, just for the listeners, is an advantage that you cannot lose. You could lose a competitive advantage. A competitive advantage might be an economy of scale. You cannot lose a comparative advantage. And here the question I am asking, have we ever fully leveraged on our comparative advantage? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, the answer is no. So now, taking into consideration where we are and the contributing factors as to what we are dealing with and what we have been dealing with, this is, in my opinion, maybe the first step in leveraging on our comparative advantage. We could be the hub for transshipments. We could be the hub for oil and gas going further north to the other Caribbean islands. We could be the hub for so many different things. We could be the hub for value-added products in agriculture. No, I don't want agriculture to take over the show, so I wouldn't go further on that, right?
No, but you're right. You're right, because at the end of the day, Trinidad and Tobago sits between north and south. We sit right there as an ideal spot between the north, the global north, and the global south. We are strategically located. And one of the things is that Trinidad and Tobago should be the fueling hub.
Correct.
It should be that people, when ships are crossing and they're going through this side of the world, they should be saying, you know what? We have a port that we could go to where fuel is readily available. It is readily, it is good priced as well, right? And that we can make a pit stop, refuel, and move on. In fact, when I was in one of my lectures at the MBA level, I didn't realize that I was actually surprised that my students pay attention to what I say as it pertains to political science. But one of the things that people don't know is that multinational corporations is part of the political science framework. And we teach that at the University of the West Indies level when we're teaching political science. That MNCs are a very critical, they play a role in the political science framework. So the other day, when Nutrien was starting to bump the gum and starting to decide they're going to bully the government of Trinidad and Tobago, I left it for a few days. And I was getting some critical information that I needed. And then I came out and I said, as the only political scientist in the country that came out and said out loud that Nutrien needs to realize that the role of an MNC in a sovereign nation is that they cannot bully a government and they cannot threaten a government in order to have their way. And if they are taking up a space in a sovereign nation and that government sees the need to raise its taxes in order to collect revenues over a period of time, it is the right of the government. And that is part of the framework by which the MNC operates. And it is within the right of the government to want to collect what is due to them. And that Nutrien of all people should know better. And then I stopped talking. I went to class, and one of my students said to me, say, Doc, you're paying attention to, I said, why? He said, because all the old talk suddenly stopped for a second. I said, well, I have more to say. One of the things that Nutrien has not paid attention with is that they've marketed on their websites that they are in a hub because Trinidad and Tobago is their only plant in this part of the world, and they make a big hullabaloo about its location and blah, 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 blah. And because they enjoy the locality and that geographic location and the luxury and all of that, they probably thought that we needed them. But I love the fact that the Prime Minister is always one step ahead and she could counter. And all the old talk about Nutrien now has suddenly died down. You know why? Because somebody was brave enough to get up and say, hey, you can't bully a country, and don't think because it's a new Prime Minister and we're a developing nation, it means that we are a punching bag to your needs. We reserve the right to raise taxes, especially taxes that has not been raised, and then especially in conditions when you all have been enjoying the company of the previous government, and you all courted the previous government in order to ensure that they didn't leverage higher taxes. Different government, different playing field, different game, different conditions. Pay me my money. And what was even better is that we were able to play hardball. And if Marvin is saying that it didn't die down, then the bottom line is they must be able. If it didn't die down, how come we're not hearing about it? If it didn't die down, how come they didn't shut down? If it didn't die down, how come the plant is still operating? You know why? Because the Prime Minister was able to take up the mantle and say, here what? I will not be bullied by an MNC from a foreign country. You are here because you chose to be here, but because you're also here at the invitation of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore there are certain conditionalities that exist, and there are certain measures that must be adhered to in order for both the country and the MNC to operate simultaneously. And that's what was done. So the thing is, people could say what they want with regard to Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister taking a hardline approach, but unless we don't stand up at some point in time and take hardline approaches and the most unpopular, prepare ourselves to be unpopular in our best interest, then we are nothing but spineless. And I will tell anybody in this room and outside that Kamala Prasad-Bissessar has finished her campaign and is sitting in his seat. Everybody else that is making noise and everybody else who is quarreling about what is going on, they are campaigning for the same seat that she now occupies, with the hope that something that they campaign on sticks. The sad part about it is this thing is ever moving. And in ever moving, she's emerging with new winds. So you saw Carrie come, and she went and she made this speech. Then you saw everybody and her friends, she embarrassed her, she did, she that, the other. But she said the right thing, because what people don't realize. So I'll tell you another thing about Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is the #1 contributor to the budget of the CARICOM Secretariat, 22%.
Correct.
That's the day. And as a result of that, we would have thought that Trinidad and Tobago has a lot more, there are a lot more Trinbagonians employed at the CARICOM Secretariat. The answer is no. And the higher you go in the hierarchy of the CARICOM Secretariat, there are fewer Trinidadians. It's a rare thing. So in other words, Trinidad and Tobago is supporting and maintaining and sustaining a system and an organism where Trinbagonians are not benefiting as well from an employment perspective. That's something to consider. And if we are the #1 contributor to the CARICOM Secretariat and to the operations of CARICOM, I think that gives us the position to also say when we think something is not right and something is wrong and there should be a shift in systems and in processes and procedures, we have that authority because we have a responsibility based on getting value for money. So we saw CARICOM opening, people had a hullabaloo, they got up the next morning, there was another headline. She was sitting down with Marco Rubio. And there were several other headlines that followed to where we are today. And there are going to be headlines on the days to come when she comes home and she reports on what is going to happen and how things are going to happen. But what people want is something to happen now. This is not only about now. It is about the next 2 years, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. As you rightfully use the word, it is about positioning. Not just positioning in the now. Positioning now in the short term, in the medium, and in the long term. And as the world turns, nothing stays stagnant. When things change, we shall change with that tide too. Because that's the way the world goes. That's the the trajectory of our current international politics. And if anybody is telling you otherwise, look at what's going on in the world.
Now, when we look at the comment that you just made there about positioning ourselves for later on and people expect things now, let's be very pointed now. We had 10 years of very little development, very little activity, almost zero positioning, even in CARICOM. To get out of that slump, as I would describe it, it's a knee-jerk reaction. And there's nothing about a knee-jerk reaction that is sustainable. And it's about time, and we are seeing this type of governance now, where the governance is not based on a knee-jerk type reaction. It is based on sustainable efforts. And I think when we really look at how we have to position ourselves later on, we are seeing the elements that create the sustainability factor in governance and in planning. So, I mean, for people who expect things now and who would have high expectations, I would say people feel like that because they know the UNC could perform in a certain way, right? But let's take things in a sustainable manner, and nothing sustainable could come from an immediate type or knee-jerk type reaction. We need to do this thing right now. Even when we look at under the context of diminishing incomes nationally, when incomes are diminishing, you have to be a lot more careful in how you spend your money. Your policies and your focal points must be very specific. You cannot afford to be making mistakes. You cannot afford to be spending money on the national level with regards to planning an economy or planning governance, and it's not going to bear or yield the type of fruits that it should be. So, and I mean, nothing is wrong with, when you really look at it, in being in an area where you have to, tighten your buckle, right? Nothing is really wrong with that. It teaches us discipline now, and it instills at a higher rate the need to operate effectively and sustainably. And I think those will be the takeaway lessons for Trinbagonians as we exit this phase now and we actually start to see development.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, you know, we are literally at a point where, so in the leadership theory, we climb. And then as we climb, there comes a point where we naturally get stagnated. And then there's a part that in the leadership theory is at a point of stagnation is for introspection and reflection. And it is also realizations. Where you are, what you've done, what you've achieved, why have you plateaued? Because plateauing is part of the natural course. And then what do you do next in order to continue going upwards, or what you don't do in order to fall? Now, I feel like we were at the threshold of whether we are standing on a threshold, either we go up or we go down. What the country, what the world, what the Trinidadians and Tobagonians are not realizing is that for the first time in a very long time, Trinidad and Tobago has found itself as an epicenter of geopolitics. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually a very good thing. Because for people who did not know that we existed, now they know. People who didn't know we had where the roads where the asphalt on their roads were coming from, now they know. Right? People who didn't have an understanding of what kind of people and culture and all of that lives in Trinidad and Tobago, now they know. If they didn't know we were an oil and gas producer, now they know. If they didn't know that we had an opportunity for maritime industries and for for manufacturing and for AI and you name the list of opportunities for diversification, now they know. And they're not because you see, if we were a country that was self-sufficient, if in all of the years of oil booms and gas booms that our country has gone through, had persons taken up the opportunity to not just build a heritage and civilization fund, and not only build a fund that has US dollars in it and reserves and all of those things, if we had done the work to really and truly diversify the country, if we didn't, for example, shut down the sugar industry, but restructure it as well so that could have sustained itself as well. And we had invested more in agriculture since 2018 when the mandate by CSME Chair Mia Motley was that Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Suriname should become the breadbasket of the region. If we had focused on that, if we had built industries and sectors that would have also been competitive enough beyond just dependence on energy, and we had become self-sufficient like the great Singapore we so desire to become, then there would be a different position we could take as it pertains to the United States and any superpower in the world. But the problem is we have not. We did not. We ought to have done what we should have done, and we didn't. But it makes no sense at this stage to be complaining about what we ought to, could have, should have do. We are now in a position where you have a prime minister who wants to take the country in a different direction, charter a legacy that is long term. And I cannot, the people who are senior to me and in this business longer than me, they've all said, but these are good things from economists. The only people who complaining right now is the international relations specialists. And that is because they want to sit on the platform of diplomacy.
They want to maintain our old status quo. That's what they want to do.
There's hard and soft. There's hard and soft diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
And they want to go into shaking hands and nodding heads and staying in the middle line. One bad drive and you get knocked off the middle line.
Exactly.
One bad drive and your economy crash. One bad decision. You want to know why it is you have your whole economy dry up. Nobody want to come here. We have mass movement of people out. And you want to know why? It is because it was on the wrong side of history. And I am sorry. You're right. I was listening at the news last night, and I'm looking at the international relations people. I'm going, one bunch of old men who just stuck in 60 years ago and clearly not reading the politics of today and need to realize they need to get with the program. And as it pertains to, you realize that the the United States has not threatened Trinidad and Tobago as it pertains to China.
Correct.
Because China and Trinidad and Tobago relations has remained in the same level as nobody has gotten a hegemony off of Trinidad and Tobago. Nobody has a control. Everybody has a piece of the Trinidad and Tobago pie. Why you think the piece of land that the current United States Embassy is being built on, that was agreed upon since Kamla Persad-Bissessar was Prime Minister between 2010 and 2015. You know? So things are happening because she also recognized that there had to be a balance, even in her own country, a balance of world power. But beyond just being a balancing act, outside there, where we want to make ourselves relevant and be at the front line, there we are going to be called upon to make certain decisions. When I talk to my uncle in Tortula, and you talk to people up the islands, they will tell you, why is it that there's a report that is saying that governments were involved in soliciting and allowing the illegal drug trade? It is because tourism in some instances wasn't only about people who fly in and plane and coming and lying and lying on the beach and enjoying themselves. Tourism also involves the unregulated people who are docking outside on their yachts and having a time, but they're sniffing certain white substances and having a party of a time, right? And we have to turn a blind eye on it because why? We want the US dollars. But if you go to an island like Grenada, which is also very uniquely geographically located, there are people there that will tell you that they don't know what crime is. They don't know what crime is. They have no murders. They have no set of rapes. They have no robberies. They could walk in the city, the town. They could walk in the country without worry. And there are people that will tell you that they don't come to Trinidad unless it's absolutely necessary, and it must be absolutely necessary for them to come here. Over the course of the weekend, I had people say that Trinidad and Tobago is scary when you look at it. I had a lady say to me who is in media, she said, my son has to potentially come to Trinidad to finish his law degree, and it is a burden that I'm carrying. I said, stop, freeze, hold on. Say, ma'am, it's not like that. It's not a war zone. It's not anarchy, and it is not chaos. Obviously, like every other nation, there are certain areas that we as Trinbagonians know we don't go to. And we have to find a way in which, and that is why Zoso irks me again, because Zoso was such a good piece of law, right? And you needed to take control of the problem, strangle it, and ensure that when you take hold of its throat and you kill it, it does not come back again. It's not like a hydra that it's not like it's not like when you it's not like demons that just continues to fester. Yeah, that is what Zoso was supposed to do: contain and eradicate, and then return to normalcy. And there are people in this country who wants that, right? So this is not just about us. It is about how we look at. I mean, there are countries in the region who don't know what crime is, and if they don't know what crime is, and the citizenry tell you they don't know what crime is, then it means that they are not exposed to it, and then therefore they will not understand it. And if you cannot understand it, and if the people that govern you also don't know what real crime is and they don't understand it, then they cannot offer a solution, because they cannot offer a solution to something that they're not familiar with, right? That is why Prime Minister Holness and Kamina Johnson-Smith of Jamaica said, Zoso worked in Jamaica. It did. It reduced crime. It restored law and order. It increased their economy. It improved the value of their dollar. It reclaimed their tourism industry, and it made Jamaica more marketable, and it made life easier. Prime Minister Holness did not. And that was a question that was raised by commentators in Jamaica. And one of the most significant achievements of the Holness administration was the reduction of crime in Jamaica as a result of the Zoso, and he never campaigned on it. He campaigned on everything else that he did. Why? Why? Because there were other things that contributed to the livelihoods and lives of the Jamaicans. More money in their pocket, better standard of living, better infrastructure. All of those things continue to work. So there are people who will tell us we are wrong. That's not true. We're lying. Well, for everybody who says to us that it's not true, it's lying, bring the statistic. Or ask the Jamaican government.
Guys,
actually, ask the political scientists there.
all right, Dr. Mohammed, I just want to come in I can't believe it's 9 o'clock already. Yeah? I really can't believe it's 9 o'clock. The conversation now starting to go good. Now, I'm reading the comments on the chat here, and I'm seeing certain individuals saying that we are being paid to push narratives by sponsors on this program. I am sorry to disappoint you folks, but we have no sponsors. We are not that fortunate to have sponsors. Just to give you a little background on how this program started, there was a group of us that used to get together and just talk about current issues in the country. And then we decided, you know what? Why don't we go live? So if other people want to join us, they could join us. And that is how this program came into being. Now, what we do is we invite speakers on this program to share their opinions and learned opinions, because we tend to invite very qualified people on the program, but we also invite members of the audience. Anybody could come to this program and express their opinions and so on, right? I mean, you are free to agree or disagree. That's what a democracy is. And we're afraid to talk on this program, earlier. Well, you talk. But we hope while you all are talking, you can in fact learn something by our very, very knowledgeable and qualified speakers. Right.
Well, Lisha, let me just add something to that. I have no problems with someone coming and saying something on the program or on the chat, but don't be misleading. And I will ask that to say people getting paid and we have sponsors, something like that. Right? Absolutely incorrect. That is not the case here. So we could speak, and freedom of speech is guaranteed, and we have no problem with that. But we have to be responsible in what we are saying, and I would ask people to appreciate and respect that. Don't just come out and say something because it's on your mind, because it may not be correct. Right? So just be careful, folks. Right? Don't cast aspersions too soon on people. Don't do that. Don't go down that road.
I would say let the people talk. We will correct. Let them talk. Anyway, guys, but I want to make one point though, right? Now I know I'm getting from some of these comments and so on that certain people are against the partnership that Canada has with the United States, right? Fine, you're entitled to your opinion. But given the rise in transnational crime, migration pressures, regional instabilities, don't tell me those things don't exist, sir. Don't. So given the rise of these things, again, I'm going to talk about transnational crime, migration pressures, regional instabilities. If Trinidad and Tobago does not partner with the United States and Latin America to stop these things, what you want us to do? Come, let's hear the solutions. What you want us to do? What we must do? Sit down, take it, accept it, let it get worse. That is what the last government was doing, right? So that's just my 2 cents on these things. If anybody at all would like to ask a question, make a comment, right? We do have a few minutes left. Please raise your hands. You utilize the chats and so on. I am seeing some comments on the chat, but we would like to hear from you personally. Dr. Mohammed is here to address any concerns and so on you might have. So please feel free. If you want to chat with us, raise your hand. We do have a few minutes left. Right. I am seeing some interesting comments here. Let me just go through them very quickly to see if there's anything we need to respond to. Okay, I'm seeing Senator Big, wonderful. How wonderful of you to join us, Senator. Right? Can you unmute and go ahead?
I don't know if you're hearing me.
Yes, we are.
I'm not going to speak long, as I'm still not at 100% well. Let me say, first of all, good night to a very old friend. Although you're looking 10 years younger than me right now. Very good night to Dr. Shane Mohammed. I'd give him any title. A pleasant good night to my very good friend. It was very nice listening to him. Very enlightening with some things I've heard. And I just basically joined to just listen tonight. I'm not going to contribute much things tonight. But as usual, the program is good, and it's always good to be locked on. And good night to everyone. And again, a special good night to Shane. Good to see you, man. Good to hear you. It's always a pleasure to hear you, pal. Have a good night.
It's very true. Brian and I have been friends for many, many years. I think we've passed 20 years now in terms of friendship. And Brian, I'm very happy to hear you. And I'm very, we have our channels by which we chat. I know that you're doing well and you have a safe and speedy recovery. And look forward to you being back in the Senate again soon.
Yes, Brian, I want to thank you for coming on the program. We have missed you. Brian is a person who normally comes onto the program as one of our speakers, but he has been down with a little health issue. And we cannot wait for you to come back. But thank you so much for joining us tonight and, sharing your little greetings and so on. We really, really appreciate it. All right. Well, okay. All right. So I am seeing a couple comments here from Richard, and he says the UN General Assembly is clearly the hub for geopolitics as it relates to votes by member states or voting by member states for bills regarding nuclear and biological weapons. I'm not exactly too sure how. Maybe Shane, I don't know if you have anything to respond to with respect to that comment.
He says the United Nations General Assembly is clearly the hub for geopolitics as it relates to votes by member states or voting by member states for bills regarding nuclear and biological weapons, hence the present disposition globally. Let me tell you something. I taught there's a module called International Organizations, by which we examine the effectiveness, the role of international organizations, the United Nations being one of them. And one of the biggest criticisms of the United Nations is that the United Nations has failed to reform itself to meet the demands of the current geopolitical and the emerging geopolitical conditions. And that while it is a space by which people can speak freely and share their views and concerns, that's all it is. Resolutions don't hold where if countries don't want it. Because and what was the purpose of the United Nations? The purpose of all of the Bretton Woods institutions that was created after the Second World War was created so that there would be peace and security across the world, that there would be as far as possible a prevention of a third world war and or proxy wars. How successful has that been since 1947? And what have we seen emerging? We are seeing emerging that there are conditions that exist in the world where some people cannot be controlled, some states refuse and cannot be contained. Some states have become states that are outside of the global village, North Korea for one. Why are the people of Iran, why have the younger generation of Iran risen up and have gotten killed? In fact, 30,000 people were killed for standing against the oppression of that regime in Iran. Women getting stoned, women getting hauled naked in the streets for not wearing a hijab. People, it is the most atrocious things, right? So we have to understand that democracy is important. And there's a reason why our democracy is the way it is, because there's freedom of speech. I note that Senator McNish, who is an independent senator, came up with the best answer that I had, that I saw, which was that it is not about what you have the freedom. You have the freedom to say what you want on social media and on platforms. What you don't or ought not to have the freedom to do is to utilize your words to denigrate someone else, to defame somebody else, to cause them mental anguish and feel as though there's the risk of physical harm. We've descended in this country where we can't seem to carry across a point with evidence and proper referencing without having to descend into degrading someone, defaming somebody's character, talking about somebody in the worst possible. If you can't argue a point and substantiate what you're saying with evidence, I just pull up a whole list as to why Adizoso has been proven to be successful in Jamaica. And there's so many different lists of and articles that are written by experts and are written by academics as to the success of Adizoso in Jamaica. We're reporting about declines and all of that. And a man is still saying that it was not successful. But yet a government won an election because of the success of the Adizoso bill. So there are some things we have to also know, and I will say this to everybody. There comes a point in time when people say what they think or how they feel, but they don't substantiate that think or feeling with evidence that shows that it comes from an academic source, close your argument and walk away, because then they can't substantiate it. That's just how it is. That's just how it is. But here's the other part of it, y'all. Especially as it pertains to the Zoso. If not the Zoso, then what? Here's my issue with the state of emergency. I've been advocating with colleagues abroad for the possibility of an international conference coming to Trinidad and Tobago, which will bring massive benefits to Trinidad. I have been lobbying for Trinidad and Tobago for over 2 years. And I finally got to the point where the proposal was written and it was sent forward, and I was in front of the committee. And one of the first things the committee said to me, a university professor from Kansas State University said to me, she said, Dr. Mohammed, I understand that you're very eager and passionate about Trinidad and Tobago, but I am very concerned about the state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, because you all are under a state of emergency. And you all have been under a state of emergency for quite a while. I said, okay. And she said, and I'm also concerned about the US advisories and the level of advisory that exists for Trinidad. And I pulled it up and I read it. And I said, yes, I agree with you 100%. There is an advisory. And I read the advisory from the State Department. And I said, but the advisory says that they're advising citizens of the United States to stay away from Sealots, Beetham, Laventille, and Cocorit, 4 places. I said, you want to know something funny? I, as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago who live here, don't go to Sealots, Beetham, Laventille, and Cocorit. And on top of that, if you were visiting Trinidad and Tobago, and you told me you needed to go to one of these places, the first question I'd ask you is why? And the second question I would ask you is, how do you intend to get there? The third thing I would advise you is go and get police escort and ensure that you are covered for whatever purpose you are going there, if it is not for anything outside of the remits for which you belong to. You are in Trinidad and Tobago. And I had to explain why Trinidad and Tobago, single apparatus that empowers the police to do what they need to do in order to go after the elements they need to go after, is needed. And why a SOE has to be implemented. I had to go through a whole historical, political, constitutional discussion about justifying what our conditions are. So a state of emergency has the potential to scare people away from coming to Trinidad and Tobago and doing business. Because the minute you hear state of emergency, especially when you come from a first world country, first world countries only institute states of emergencies because of crime, of violence, of social unrest, for the purposes of natural disasters. That's what they know it for. Not that it is going to be something that is supposed to be utilized as a tool to contain miscreants in a society. That's not what they're accustomed to. So for people who don't want this also, and don't want the state of emergency, I am looking forward to someone who could come up with a solution, who is resident in Trinidad and Tobago, who has been subjected to restrictions of movement and looking over their back and being aware of their surroundings and looking at the time when the children coming home and making sure that they have cameras well positioned so they can see right around, and was barricaded themselves inside because of all of that. I would love somebody to come up with a solution that can provide a long-term array of mechanisms by which the government can work with, and then put it forward into the public's domain, because national security is not my expertise. Put it into the public's domain and then see what people say. And it seems that we have gotten accustomed to damned if you do and damned if you don't in Trinidad and Tobago. And then I will have to hear some nonsense about crime is a business, one of the biggest businesses, but it cannot sustain a legally framed and a legal working economy of legitimacy and effective and proper commerce. And no country, no businessman out there, no entity, no multinational corporation wants to do business with a narco country. And I'll tell you this, if they do, there are conditions by which they operate. And one of it is cheap labor. So unless you want people to be working for $1 US a day, think again.
All right.
Why do you know, Doc? Just a side note, why do you think we import milk from Middle Eastern Europe? Because the cost of labor there is 10 cents US a day, you know.
Okay, good. When someone who is living in Venezuela who has a degree in journalism told me that they couldn't practice their journalism because they would be a target of the Maduro government and had to settle for being a social media manager for SJC and Company Limited, and tell me that they had a degenerative eye disease that required them to change their glasses every 3 years with the eventuality of having surgery, was working for $15 US a month and had to buy food, pay rent, and pay bills. Then I realized that this is a failed nation. So I'm not talking about things I don't know. And
not just Venezuela.
And I wouldn't take I'm not going to waste my time on your time come here and talk about nonsense. You all know for a fact I talk too much when it comes to on a daily basis. Sometimes the phone just won't stop ringing, right? Because people want information. But I'll tell you about lived experiences, and not because it's all Marvin, not because it's in almost all Central American countries, it makes it right. That is one of the reasons why Trump had a Shield of Americas, and several of those countries are what he's talking about. It is time to break the backbone of the parasite that is drowning out our countries. And Trinidad and Tobago is one of those. Plain and simple. And the answer would always be, when you want help, yes.
Okay, guys, let me come in here. It's 9:20. We normally wrap up by 9:30. I am seeing Trini with his hand up, so we'll give him the opportunity to speak, and then we can take any closing remarks from Shane. Go ahead, Trini, unmute and make your contribution. Trini? Okay, well, I think we all right, I think for some reason he isn't unmuting, so I don't know what is the issue there. So I think, guys, now I am seeing quite a bit of comments on social media as well. I see people saying it's a shame the independent senators did not support the Zoso bill, right? Somebody say we should block all the comments where people talking nonsense, but we don't operate like that. You all know that, right? You know, we give people a space to say whatever they have to say. This is a democracy. People you could agree, disagree. This is what democracy is all about. Trini, are you unmuting? I'm seeing your hand up again. All right. So I think there's some issue or something, right? Or Shane, somebody says they love to listen to you, right? So all good things, all good things. All right. So Donnie, you have any final questions or so?
No, I think, we covered it extensively. I think when we have Dr. Mohammed here, it's always a very detailed, well-researched and in-depth discussion, more than what we think we'll be discussing. In closing, I would give my closing remarks and say that I think that what is going on right now is our geo repositioning, is our geopolitical repositioning, where we were in one sphere before, and now we are seeing movements to create certain changes there. And as I said before, if you're not in the room, you're out of it, right? There is a definite need for change across sectors. There are too many issues for this small country. And in my opinion, we are seeing the work being done and put in, which forms the basis and the catalyst for that change. So, Dr. Mohammed, your closing remarks.
My closing remarks is that in 2015, I was a very angry individual because I did not believe that the UNC, the partnership, deserved to lose that election because it was a very high-performing government. That's one. But in the same breath, in 2015, when the government changed, I was willing to give the Prime Minister at that point in time the opportunity to prove that he could do better than what existed. And by 2017, that became a crashing failure. Here we are, in 2025, the country voted for change. People were frustrated by the norms, but you have to understand that in voting for change, you can't vote for change, and when change is coming, you don't want to accept what is happening. And change at a governance level, especially given the mandate that this Prime Minister has been given, and she has been lucky to get it twice, which is a very rare thing. Change in institutional reform, change in the way we do processes and procedures, change in the way we do business, change in the way we do security, legislative changes, societal changes, behavioral changes. Change has to come. And as much as there are going to be people that are going to continue saying nay, 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 there's equal number or more than enough persons to say yes, 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 yes. And I think that it's not even 1 year in government since this Prime Minister has taken office, and she deserves to be given fair and sufficient time to make the changes that is required after 50 years of republicanism that has us stuck in a constitutional chokehold that we cannot seem to get out of. So I'm looking forward to the changes. I'm looking forward to constitutional changes, institutional changes, processes, the way we do things in terms of markets, in terms of diversification, in terms of self-sufficiency. It is going to take time, but the seeds we plant within the next year to 2 years is going to be long-term forests that we benefit from. And I look forward to and I say openly, as long as the Prime Minister's heart is that we, as a people, will benefit long-term, and that is her goal, then she should go on. She will get the support as long as all things are right in the sight of doing right by the people that has elected her. Plain and simple.
Thank you for that, Dr. Mohammed.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. Tonight's topic was TNT's geopolitical positioning, and I want to say that Dr. Shane Mohammed has certainly done justice to that topic. Thank you so much for coming on the program, for sharing your knowledge with us, your opinions with us. I want to thank everybody. In fact, we had several people who came in the program and they didn't agree with some of the things that were being said, but that's okay. You can agree to disagree. This is a democracy. We have no problem with that whatsoever, right? So I want to thank all of you all for your questions, your comments. We have a regular group that joins us every week, regardless of what the topic is. I thank you so much for your loyal viewership of this program. So guys, on that note, I just want to say good night to all of you all. Stay safe and join us again next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. for another episode of One on One. Thank you and good night.
Have a good night, everyone.